All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the February 6th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Can I get tonight on the agenda, we have 3 letters of recommendation, 3 information reports, 1 preliminary plat for a new residential subdivision, and 1 other item. Can I get a roll call of commission members, please?
Commissioner Helfrey, Commissioner Ward,
Here.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yeah.
Commissioner Broyles,
Here.
Commissioner Clayton, Commissioner Depler, Commissioner Jackson, Chair Beatty,
Here.
Councilmember Brost,
Here.
Mayor Boland.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's hear. Does the Department of Planning have any opening comments?
No, sir, but thank you.
All right, thank you. And can I get an approval of the minutes from our January 17th meeting? Motion by Commissioner Broyle, second by Commissioner Cohn. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain?
I'll abstain.
All right, so 501 abstention on the minutes. Thank you. All right, let's see here. And then public comment session, or do we have any speaker cards?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have 1 speaker card, Ms. Wilcox.
All right, Ms. Wilcox, come on up.
I'm Joy Wilcox, Ward 1. I'm here to ask for your help passing on my proposal so it can go in front of City Council. I appreciate your help with that. I also want to say thank you to Joe and Travis. They really listened to me. They helped me. We spoke. First, I sent an email. Then I spoke with Joe on the phone. He explained some things to me. Very insightful, very helpful. And then I asked for a meeting. The 3 of us had a meeting. I wanted to make sure we were on the same page before I really decided to move forward. And we were. And each time that I've appeared before you, I've asked for the paperwork ahead of time so that I knew what I was talking about. Both times it was provided to me, and I believe that the paperwork in front of you, it showed a real understanding of my feelings, my desires within still the framework of the zoning district. And I thank Joe and Travis for that. It was really a pleasure. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you for your comments.
Mr. Chair, we do have a few on Zoom, but no other speaker cards.
All right. If anyone on Zoom would like to speak for the public comment session, please raise your hand and we will promote you to the panel so you can speak your piece.
No one has raised their hand.
All right. This time we will close public comments then. So no public hearings tonight, so we'll move right into old business. Mr. Newberry, PZ 15-22.
PZ 15-22, Glenn Scott 16245, Windcrest Ridge Court, Wildwood, Missouri 63005, care of Helio Solar Power 1017 South of Vegas Street, Alhambra, California 91801. A request for a conditional use permit CUP in the R1A 22,000 square foot residence district with planned residential development overlay district, street address 16245 Windcrest Ridge Court, locator number 21U 240557, for the purpose of installing of roof mounted solar panels, which are to be so situated on the dwelling as to be visible from the adjoining roadway. This request is to be reviewed in accordance with chapter 415.120 R1A 22,000 square foot residence district regulations of the City of Wildwood zoning ordinance, which establishes standards and requirements for the installation of all solar panels. The requested permit is required due to the panel's placement on the front-facing areas of the roofs of the dwelling, thereby causing them to be visible from the adjoining roadway. Ward 2.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vinich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Department of Planning has prepared for your consideration tonight The draft letter of recommendation that reflects the latest action of this body relative to this conditional use permit request. As you'll recall and noted on the cover sheet of this particular draft, the Planning and Zoning Commission voted 6-2 to deny the conditional use permit and not authorize the front-facing solar panels. Tonight, again, this particular item is ready for final action by the commission. With final action, it'll be a receipt and file at the city council at its next available meeting. If there are any questions for Ms. Ripito, Mr. Newberry, or I, we'd be glad to answer them at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Or sorry, Mr. Vernich.
Sorry, I confused you.
Is there any discussion or a motion? Councilman Brost?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the recommendation.
All right, motion by Councilman Brost. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Cohn. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, roll call vote.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Commissioner Depler,
No.
Chair Beatty,
No.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
and Mayor Boland.
Yes.
All right, so I believe that was 5-2.
Yes, sir.
All right, so fails for lack of majority, correct? All right. All right, moving on to PZ 17-22. Mr. Vernich.
PZ 17-22, 17011 Manchester Road, Kevin Amont, care of Jennifer James, Altea Land Surveyors, 3906 South Old Highway 94, St. Charles, Missouri, 63304. A request for a change in zoning from the NU non-urban resident district to the R3 10,000 square foot resident district upon a property that is 0.9 acres in size, which is located on the northeast corner of Manchester Road and Lindy Lane. Street address 17011 Manchester Road, St. Louis County, locator number 24V510715. The subject property is designated the Neighborhood Edge District under the current Town Center Regulating Plan as adopted by the Planning and Zoning Commission on June 7th, 2021. This particular site is located in Ward 8.
Thank you, Mr. Vernich. Mr. Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the department has prepared for your consideration tonight a draft letter of recommendation. The draft letter of recommendation reflects the commission's action at its January 17, 2023 meeting to approve the requested change in zoning for this property that's located within the city's town center area. As the commission will recall, a component of that approval was the required dedication of 10 feet along Lindy Lane in lieu of the public space requirements. So with that, again, the draft letter of recommendation reflects the action of the commission and is in the appropriate form for final action and to be forwarded to city council. If any of the commission members have any questions, the department's available. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Any discussion or motion? Commissioner Cohn.
I'll make a motion to approve the recommendations by the planning department.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Cohn, seconded by Commissioner Depler. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, roll call vote.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes.
Chair Beatty,
Yes.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
and Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Thank
All right.
you.
Motion carries. Thank you. All right, Mr. Vernich, PZ 18-22.
The final letter of recommendation is PZ 18-22 Swizzer Riding Stable, care of Kristen Swizzer, 1351 Shepherd Road, Wildwood, Missouri, 63038. A request for a conditional use permit, CUP, in the NU non-urban resident district for an 8-acre parcel of ground that is located on the west side of Shepherd Road, north of its intersection with Christmas Valley Road and Thiel Drive. Street address 1351 Shepherd Road, St. Louis County, locator number 20V 220171. Proposed use, a riding stable inclusive of a building and portion of designated site for the purposes of offering riding lessons to the general public for commercial purposes. This particular location is in Ward 3.
Thank you, Mr. Vinich. Mr. Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the department has prepared for your consideration tonight a draft letter of recommendation regarding the requested conditional use permit that Mr. Vunich just described into the record. The Planning and Zoning Commission acted at its January 17th meeting to support the requested conditional use permit with a set of conditions that are outlined in attachment B. And the draft letter of recommendation, again, reflects the action of the commission to support the request and conditional use permit. And it is in the appropriate form to be forwarded to the city council for its receipt and filing and consideration. With that, the department's available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Discussion or a motion? All right, it's motion by Commissioner Cohn.
I'd make a motion to approve the recommendation by the planning.
All right, seconded by Commissioner Boyles. Any further discussion or questions? All right, roll call vote.
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Chair Beatty,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
and Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries. Thank you. All right, Mr. Newberry, PZ 1-23.
PZ 1-23 Joy A. Wilcox Living Trust, 17345 Manchester Road, Wildwood, Missouri, 63038. A request for a change in zoning from the amended C8 Planned Commercial District, Town Center Historic Pond District to the R1 1-acre Residence District, Town Center Historic Pond District for a 1-acre tract of land that is located on the north side of Manchester Road, west of Pond Road, locator number 23W220207. Street addresses 17345 and 17351 Manchester Road. Proposed uses, all permitted uses being set forth in chapter 415.110 R1 1-acre Residence District, Ward 1.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vinich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Department of Planning has prepared for your consideration tonight its information report with accompanying recommendation regarding the request that it was just read into tonight's record. The request is to change the current amended C8 Plan Commercial District zoning to the R1 1-acre Resident District to accommodate the use of property as it is at this time. The property has 2 buildings associated with it. The first is the residence that Ms. Wilcox has referenced. And then second, the other building is a commercial building that at one time was Lake Chesterfield Motors and has had a number of different commercial and service tenants. Department would note key amongst its justification for recommendation for favorable change in zoning is the fact that this particular lot is located in the Pond Historic District. The Pond Historic District under the city's town center plan has a range of activities associated with it, and those activities have a range of zoning district designations. It's important to note that this change to a residential zoning district is consistent with the Pond Historic District and could be changed in the future back to a commercial designation and still be consistent with the Pond Historic District. In this particular instance, there's a lot of flexibility and latitude given the historic pattern associated with the area. Tonight, the department is recommending approval of the change in zoning. If there are any questions for Ms. Ripito, Mr. Newberry, or I, we certainly be glad to answer them at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vinich. Discussion or motion?
Make a motion to move forward with the change of zoning as recommended by the department.
All right, thank you, Mayor Boland. Is there seconded by Councilman Brost? And yeah, I appreciate that you said that we could easily change it back to commercial if the need arose in the future. I feel like we've lost so much commercial space here. In what limited areas we've allowed it, but
I think the fact that Pond, along with Grover and some other communities, have such a strong history element to them. And those were kind of areas where mixed use actually occurred long before the concept of new urbanism. I
Mhm.
think it's appropriate that we accommodate the petitioner's request and look forward to the future to see what it might bring.
Sounds good. Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote.
Commissioner, excuse me, Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Chair Beatty,
Yes,
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Thank you.
motion carries. Thank you. All right, Mr. Newberry, PZ 13-22.
PZ 13-22, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request for consideration of possible changes or amendments to various provisions of Chapter 415 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Wildwood, including but not limited to sections 415.030, 415.090, 415.110, 415.120, 415.130, 415.140, 415.1.150 and 415.160 pertaining to the regulation of home occupations and home-based businesses within the various zoning districts within the city and applicable definitions pertaining thereto in light of recently adopted state law, all wards.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the commission, I would first like to acknowledge Mr. Young, our city attorney, for his assistance in the development of this particular report, and more particularly the regulations that are being proposed to address changes that the state legislature has made relating to home-based businesses. Obviously, without the assistance of the city attorney, it would have been difficult to create the concise language that is being presented to you tonight for your consideration. As I just noted, home occupations have been part of the city of Wildwood since its incorporation. Home occupations had a number of restrictions associated with them, appropriately so to protect the neighborhoods where they exist. Recently, as is mentioned in the report, the Missouri State Legislature changed a lot of those regulations to accommodate home-based businesses on a more broader and flexible approach. Those changes to state statute must be addressed in our local zoning ordinance. Tonight, with the assistance again of the city attorney, we have presented to you what we believe are appropriate changes to address consistency with the state of Missouri, but also continue forward and try to protect our residential areas from intrusions of commercial uses that would be inappropriate. At this time, I'd like to defer to Mr. Young if he'd like to add anything relative to his effort in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, members of the commission. Consistent with your, the discussion that was had when we had the public hearing on this matter, the draft that you have before you was drafted with the intent to, as strongly as possible, preserve the residential character of the residential areas of the city, but while also complying with this new statutory requirements.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Young. I know. Names are not my strongest suit. Is there any question or discussion or emotion? Councilman Brost.
Well, I'll make a motion to accept the recommendation, and I think it's one of those that, I mean, do we effectively have a choice?
We don't.
Effectively, no.
So it's not a difficult decision.
All
So
right.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Councilman Brost. There a second? Seconded by Commissioner Broyles. Any further discussion? Commissioner Cohen?
Basically, we really don't have much choice. That's what we're hearing tonight. We need to conform with the state legislation, and that's about it, right?
I would liken this to the telecommunications requirements we recently discussed with the tower that's being proposed at St. Alban Road Church. Again, the state is delving more and more into local zoning issues to address what I assume they believe is an uneven application across the state. Certainly, we believe we do it in the highest level based upon input from our city attorney, the Department of Planning, and you collectively as the Planning and Zoning Commission. So yes, we don't have much choice, and it might be a bitter pill to swallow.
All right. All right, roll call vote.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes,
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Chair Beatty,
Yes.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Thank
All
you.
right, motion carries. Thank you. All right, let's see here. Mr. Newberry, PZ 5-21.
PZ 5-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request for the Planning and Zoning Commission to conduct a comprehensive review of, then consider potential changes to City of Wildwood's Municipal Code, Chapter 410, Tree Preservation and Restoration Code, and its associated landscape manual and sustainable plantings guide for the purposes of ensuring such are consistent with current techniques, reflective of best practices, and accomplish the goals and objectives of the master plan of the city of Wildwood. All wards.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vinich.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the department has prepared for your consideration tonight recommended changes to our tree preservation and restoration code. In that report, the department notes that when the city incorporated, this might have been one of the more controversial set of regulations that was proposed. In fact, the regulations were held out of the first initial approval of a number of ordinances relating to land use and land development. Ultimately, in February of 1996, the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code was approved. That code was a balance between what many would describe the incorporator's desire to preserve as many trees in all instances versus others that saw it as a potential problem for development in the future. This was inclusive of individual property owners as well. Ultimately, though, the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code has been in place since February of 1996. There have been modifications made to it over the course of time. Key amongst those modifications was the recent change to the grand trees and how mitigation or restoration of a removed grand tree may be addressed. Additionally, in that same period of time, the Sustainable Planning's Guide was adopted by the Planning and Zoning Commission and endorsed and ratified by the City Council. That particular Sustainable Planning's Guide came on the heels of a very droughty year in 2008 and problems associated with potable wells drying up in areas west of Route 109, and therefore trying to address natives more than non-natives and lessening the amount of potable water used basically for landscaping purposes. And so ultimately, the city has always tried to proceed forward in a positive direction as we learn more about our tree inventory and assets, and ultimately how our property owners treat them and how the development community addresses them as part of their projects. Tonight, there's a lot there, and the department is hoping that we can at least introduce the issue tonight. I will not be asking for a motion to approve the information report with recommendation. I think tonight we want to basically answer your questions, that being Mr. Young, Ms. Ripito, Mr. Newberry, and I. Refine this information report with recommendation and then have the letter of recommendation prepared as quickly as possible, if not for the March meeting, obviously, but certainly the April meeting of this year. I do want to go through a couple of other points before I open the floor to comments, questions, and et cetera. Key amongst this process, which has taken a bit of time, is that the department, I should say the city via the department, did a substantial amount of outreach First and foremost, we engaged our arborists, our certified arborists that are under contract with the city, that being Davy Resource Group and two different gentlemen. We also sat down and met with the Missouri Department of Conservation and the urban forester associated with this particular area, which is inclusive of Wildwood. Beyond that, we did also a public survey. We had survey cards here at City Hall at many of our events, out at the park areas where people could basically provide input and identify what they believe are the strengths of Wildwood relative to trees and where the weaknesses might exist and how we could do better. As part of that, we then collated all of that information into what we believe was a set of steps that needed to be undertaken. And those steps were presented to you in August of 2022. And at that time, there was feedback from the commission on them. And ultimately, that was the guidance that led to what's being proposed tonight. Amongst those changes are a number of revisions and additions to the definition section. Those definitions that are added or revised were identified not only by our certified arborists from Davy Resource Group, but also the Missouri Department of Conservation of being weak or in some instances inaccurate. So those are key components of the changes you're seeing tonight. Along with those, the department is asking for the commission's direction on updating not only the landscape manual, but the sustainable planning's guide. Those two documents, I think, can be merged into one. And I think merging them into one that emphasizes natives and invasive management would be beneficial to the community. And that, I think, needs to be done by a consultant, because I believe the landscape manual is best served when there's good graphics to give people a step-by-step approach on how to basically to do a tree stand delineation, a tree preservation plan, how to plant trees, bushes, shrubs, etc. So again, there is another step in all of this, but tonight we're looking at the regulations as proposed. Along with those two items, the department would note that, again, grand trees have always been the focus of this commission in many regards. And obviously, when we talk about projects, we always talk about where are the grand trees and how are we preserving them and what are we doing if they are subject to removal because there's just no other approach. We basically have maintained what we've been doing in the past, but we've also now added grand tree stands and specimen vegetation to those same protections. And I think that's come into focus with the reserve at Wildwood, just noting that there were grand tree stands, none of which collectively or individually had trees that met our definition, but certainly collectively deserved further consideration for preservation. We've also modified the standards for the grand tree. We've reduced their sizes because based upon Andy Berg from Davy Resource Group, that's a direction he recommended. And we've also given more flexibility to a certified arborist to make determinations of health or non-health. Andy Berg was clear in his comments that almost any old tree that would ultimately be considered grand or close to grand tree status have dead wood. That doesn't mean it's not a good tree. It just needs to be trimmed and maintained. So again, we're taking that into account with what we're doing here tonight. As I say, we've added some additional language. We've clarified language to improve what I hope is the usability and understandability. Mr. Young has had this for a few days. We haven't had a lot of time to go over it together collectively. And so that is why tonight I'm presenting it to you for comments, questions, direction, but will not be seeking a motion on it based upon the need to just refine it just a bit more. Thank you.
All right, Mayor Boland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to thank you for bringing this forward. I'm just going to go through, I don't think my list of things, questions is a better word. I don't think it would necessarily be productive to get into them tonight. They're probably more legal issues than anything. And these are in no particular order of priority. First, under the definition of grand tree, we've stricken the sub-definition contained within that of what fair or better as assessment by professional arborist means in terms of its condition. In other words, they would presumably need to be salvaged if its condition assessed by a professional arborist is fair or better. So my first item is, well, if we're going to get rid of the definition, then someone's going to inevitably ask, what does fair or better mean? And so I think we may want to have an answer for that. Number two, in that same definition as assessed by a professional arborist, whose professional arborist? Is it our professional arborist or an applicant's professional arborist, any professional arborist? Who is that individual? In terms of the grand tree stand, it starts with a grouping of trees. Is it a grouping of trees in a plot of land, a half acre, 50 feet by 50 feet, or a mile wide? I mean, an acre, 3 acres? What the grouping of trees within what scope of territory? That also have in the same definition along with any other native or complementary vegetation. So I guess I would have two comments there. If we have a grouping of trees in a designated territory that we like, whether it has complementary vegetation or not would be irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. It might be nice to have, but I'm not sure that would be determinative as a tail that wags a dog in terms of whether we want to let that group of trees go. If we do want to have the native or complementary vegetation, then my next question is, what is the definition of that? Some people might argue that well, what's the invasive species that we deal with? The honeysuckle, has reached a point of being native. It certainly is not native. And so what is native? When did, how long does it have to be here for it to be classified as native? So I just think those are some things on that definition that might need to be vetted a little more. And then lastly, under prohibited practices, it says no tree shall be subject to excessive cutting and so forth. I would just want to make sure that we're not, by virtue of these changes, impinging on the rights of landowners that may want, without a development being charged or being involved or whatever, to get rid of one of their trees. I think that could get a little draconian, as much as I support the trees and in fact was the guy who pushed for the grand tree ordinance that got all this started. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
Commissioner Broyles?
How does that homeowner not knowing what they're, sorry about that. Thank you. Is there a process that they need to go through, something they need to fill out? I know there's a lot in that, but I think some residents who live west of here where we lived need that information when they move in.
Well, certainly that kind of dovetails onto a discussion Mr. Young and I will be having with the commission in a few minutes regarding reoccupancy and how we notify people when they move into Wildwood of what our codes expect relative to the care of their property, et cetera. But to answer you, I think right now between the Sustainable Planning's Guide and the Landscape Manual, we probably have 300 pages of information. And that's way too much. And that's why I strongly believe, and hopefully the commission will be convinced, that we need to combine the two and simplify. That the information is extensive and appropriate, but certainly if you look at it, your tendency is not to delve too deep into it. And so I think making a user-friendly guide that would be an appendix to the landscape manual, it would be very appropriate. Most recently, when we were removing ash trees and replacing them in subdivisions, the Department of Public Works did a door hanger. And it just said, this is the species of tree. Here are a few steps that you should consider in care of the tree. If you have any questions, contact the Department of Public Works. Things like that, I think we could look into as part of this overall.
So that's like a house call, right? A
Somewhat.
doctor's house call.
The nice thing is the folks that were planting the trees for us were making the house calls, not individual
Okay,
staff.
okay.
You mentioned the ash trees there. I noticed, 4 or 5 on my street disappearing in recent months. Is that what that was?
Yes.
Okay.
And there is a replanting program. We started with high priority ash trees, those that were already very much diseased and or dead, went to medium, and now we're removing the low priority ones that people look at and said they're healthy trees, but we know that they're not going to stay that way.
Okay. Commissioner Helfrey?
So I apologize first for being late, although I did let them know. And since I came late, I have a question about this. Does this apply to street trees in neighborhoods?
Yes.
They would fall into this. And so with the maintenance of those street trees, one of the things that the mayor just read was about the maintenance of them, and it was about topping them and things like that. I think that I'm going to piggyback on what she said about the communication. When at one point in time, our trustees had on our website the letter from the city of Wildwood that said, this is what, you're responsible for with your trees and so forth. And it would be nice if there was some sort of a letter that could be given to the homeowner associations that said, here's the information you need, or here's where it is. When we had our Zoom meeting with the Department of Planning about the trees a couple months ago, someone had mentioned doing an update to the website and, being able to easily find it. So that is also another thing I would suggest. But I think that one of the problems that people in neighborhoods have is they don't know their responsibilities or the things that they're allowed to do with their street trees. And so I know it says grand trees a lot in here, but it doesn't really specify street trees that I read over. And so I would maybe ask to do something specifically for that, including replacing them. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yes, go ahead.
Ms. Humphrey, I think the current language in the code references public trees. And so those are the ones that obviously are in the public right of ways beyond those that are, for the most part, on any site owned by the city of Wildwood. And certainly we'll take a look at that. Mr. Young, Ms. Ripito, Mr. Newberry. And I will make sure that we clearly identify arborist practices. And so when that happens, what we're hoping to do now is to basically address them with more direct language than just general care of trees. And so hopefully, as you go through this after tonight, and when we meet again to talk about it, you'll see that we've strengthened that area for public trees as well as private trees. And also, we certainly can do a better job of education. Most recently, we've added information to our e-newsletter about the process for removing a tree that's in a protected area or an area that is no disturb, as well as street trees. It all requires just a simple site visit from our code inspector and then an authorization if justified.
So I've got to ask, because I've asked you about this specific spot before, but the sidewalk along 109 in front of Wildwood Trail, there were some trees that were getting overgrown and growing to the spot where you were running into branches as you were walking along the sidewalk. And so those got taken out. And now I've noticed 2 new trees have been put in, and they're still going to grow straight into the power lines right above them.
Well, hopefully not. So the scenario there is those trees that you had identified to the Department of Planning were identified to our Department of Public Works, and we began the process of looking at trimming them so that they would not be a nuisance on the public sidewalk. lo and behold, somewhere in all of this, Ameren, Missouri decided to upgrade that line on the same side of that street. So they are the entity that removed the trees. They also are the entity that picked the trees for replanting. They gave us a list of 3 or 4. We picked from that list what we thought were the best. And so they should not grow into the lines because they came from Ameren, Missouri themselves.
Okay. And so are on the west side of Manchester between like the old city hall and 109, are those lindens that are there. Some of those are getting to the point where they're really, if you're taller and walking along the sidewalk, you're hitting tree branches.
I'll let the Department of Public Works know of your concern. I would also note that per the direction of the mayor and city council as part of our budget for 2023, the Department of Public Works has funding to hire a arborist or some type of certified tree expert as a standing position in that department. So we're hoping that by engaging an individual with expertise, we can do a better job of managing our tree assets.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Helfrey?
Okay, I have one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
A couple months ago, I sent a letter to the city regarding several trees in our neighborhood that had died or been sick or been removed. And I'm just curious what the status is on replacing those trees. Thank you. I'm really done this time. Sorry.
No, as many questions as you have. That information was forwarded to our Department of Public Works. It is part, as we do with any of our tree requests, a list is created. Funding is set aside each year by the mayor and city council for tree planting in our public right-of-ways and public lands. And so from that perspective, they should be replaced, hopefully this spring, early spring.
Okay, thank you.
I'll check on them though to verify.
All right. Any further discussion?
I would just ask if over the next week you have a chance to look through it and see anything else that might be caught your eye or create a concern or raise a question. Please just let the Department of Planning know. You can email Ms. Ripito, Mr. Newberry, or I will collect those. And those will be the items that Mr. Young and the department review. And thanks for your input. It's very important. And so we do appreciate it.
All righty, let's see here. Looks like Mr. Vunich, site development plan for West Eden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A recommendation report on a preliminary plat for the West Eden subdivision, which has been submitted by Wayland Custom Homes, Inc., NU non-urban district, resident district, northeast corner of Melrose Road and State Route 100, street address 18456 Woodland Meadows Drive, St. Louis County, locator number 25X 520021, which supports the approval of a 12-lot residential subdivision on a 66-acre tract of land, with each of these properties being 3.4 acres in size in area. Got one too many in area in there. This particular lot is located in Ward 1.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Newberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the department has prepared for your consideration tonight a recommendation report regarding a preliminary plat for a large lot subdivision, which is proposed at the southeast corner of State Route 100 and Melrose Road. As the commission members may recall, the commission previously considered a request for a waiver for a wastewater treatment facility for this proposed 12-lot subdivision. The commission supported that waiver and forwarded it to City Council. The City Council also supported the waiver and approved it by resolution, thereby allowing each of the lots to have individual wastewater treatment facilities on the lots in lieu of a centralized treatment facility. The purpose of tonight's presentation is for the preliminary plat for the subdivision, which must be presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission and reviewed and acted upon before the petitioner can proceed to the record plat process. The petitioner is proposing to subdivide the 66-acre tract of land into 12 individual lots, all on 3.4 acres or greater, as well as a new private street access from Melrose Road and dedicated common ground areas. The review of the plat indicates compliance based on a number of considerations. First of these considerations is compliance with the city's master plan. The property is located in the non-urban land use category of the master plan, which anticipates single-family homes on individual lots at a density of 1 unit per 3 acre. Next, in considering the compatibility of the use with the surrounding properties, the review indicates that the surrounding pattern is large lot subdivisions or large lots used for residential purposes. Therefore, the proposed use is compatible with the surrounding areas. And lastly, the preliminary plat notes compliance with the city zoning regulations and the subdivision and development regulations in terms of setbacks, lot widths, and required protected areas. In acknowledging this compliance, the department would like to address 2 critical components associated with the proposed development. First and foremost has already been mentioned, but I'll briefly touch on it again. The waiver was granted to allow individual treatment facilities on each of the individual lots. This waiver was conditioned both by the commission and the resolution that was passed by the city council. There was associated with this set of conditions that ensures the treatment of the effluent as well as the long-term maintenance of the individual treatment facilities. And then also a set of conditions were included so that if a 13th lot would ever be considered in the future, that the necessary mechanisms and easement areas, et cetera, would be in place to require a connection to a treatment facility in the future. Again, the proposal tonight is for 12 lots. This is an anticipation of a potential future subdivision, given a few of the lots are greater than 6 acres in size. The next item is access to potable water. First and foremost, the department would like to note that the nearest access to a public connection to water is almost a mile away and is not required by the city's code, nor reasonable for this number of homes. The commission will recall, however, that during the consideration of the waiver request that concerns were expressed by neighboring property owners relating to the access to potable water. At that time, the department advised the commission of the state's reasonable use doctrine in terms of property owner's ability to utilize as much water as reasonably possible. And working with the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, the petitioner is currently proposing the use of multifamily wells, that being 6 wells serving 12 homes. These multifamily wells, from the department's perspective, are positive, given this approach will reduce the possibility and occurrences of contamination. It's important to note that the multifamily wells are not intended to reduce the amount of water used by any individual household. It's a water quality approach, not a water quantity approach. And the department would also like to note that at this stage, the multifamily wells is what the petitioner is pursuing, but the option remains to also have a community well with storage if that is determined appropriate by the MDNR, the petitioner, and the city. In conclusion, the department is presenting a recommendation report that is favorable to the preliminary plat. As is noted in the department's report, the favorable recommendation is based on 3 items, premised on 3 items, that the items, mechanisms, and notes relative to the wastewater treatment on individual lots, and if a 13th lot were to be added, must be included on the record plat. Any necessary items relative to the potable water must also, the multifamily wells or community wells must also be addressed on the record plat. And the department notes a needed refinement to some of the natural resource protected areas relative to disturbance and foundation setback requirements. And in conclusion, again, the department's recommending approval of the preliminary plat and is available for any questions the commission might have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mayor Bullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make a motion. Before I do, I just have one question. I couldn't find in the background material a topographic survey that would allow me to, as a novice, at least reach a conclusion about the placement of the residences vis-a-vis the road. Is it the case that the topography of the overall tract warrants the homes being sufficiently close to the road, or is it such that the homes could be located farther from the road?
Mr. Mayor, in this particular instance, there is a fairly wide ridge line. And the ridge line will accommodate what we believe is the necessary width for the right of way with 34 feet with the 20-foot road. Therefore, again, once you get off the ridge line, the slopes get pretty substantial. And so that's why you see them within that 50-foot distance.
So in other words, if they were placed far, and I thought that might be the answer, but I just didn't see anything here that allowed me to determine that. So if the bottom line is the homes were placed farther from the road, they would be downhill.
Yes.
Okay. I would move to approve the preliminary plat as recommended by the department.
All right. Commissioner Helfrey?
So I have a question before I make a motion. Okay, so where would they put a 13th lot? Because all these other houses are right along the road, and if they did that, then where would they put the sewer? And where would they put the? Okay, thanks.
Ms. Helfrey, thanks for the question, and I'll do my best to answer it. Certainly, Mr. Vunish can correct me if I say anything wrong. The intent of the provisions to protect if a 13th lot were to be added were, again, because some of the lots are 6 acres or greater, and in principle could be subdivided in the future. So without those provisions, the city wouldn't, or this subdivision wouldn't be protected from how to manage the wastewater treatment if that were to occur in the future.
I guess I just don't understand, because it would seem to me that if we're making them show where everything is now, where would they put the sewage treatment for that 13th house and so forth? Where would it go on here? Everything else is along the road. Does that make sense? Am I making sense, or am I making this too hard?
Yes, ma'am. And as part of the waiver that was granted by the commission and ultimately approved by city council, the design of wastewater for these individual lots needs to take into account if there was a centralized wastewater treatment plan in the future. And so the design needs to ensure that gravity will work for each of the 12 lots to a centralized location. And that location would probably be in common ground, like most centralized wastewater treatment plants are situated. The rationale, as Mr. Newberry explained very well, is we've got 6+ acre lots as part of the development. And we also have common ground, but I've seen common ground be developed. And so we're just making sure that if somebody were to attempt a 13th lot, they'd understand that there's a significant cost. Obviously, the city of Wildwood would do what it could not to accommodate it, because what we promised the community through our process is 12 lots, each of them being 3.4 acres or greater in size. But 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we just want to make sure we keep our promise.
Thank you very much.
And it is not, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Mhm.
Is it
Go
not the
ahead.
case that if that were to occur, it would have to go through the re-subdivision process,
Definitely, Mr. Mayor.
which comes back through here?
Right, well, then I'll second the motion, but thank you for answering my questions.
Yeah, because, lot 7 appears to be the only one that's 6 acres, plus if they were to sell off the common ground, or something like that. Commissioner Broyles? Commissioner Cohn?
With regard to the community wells, would that allow for an individual homeowner to have a swimming pool? Could they fill that? And as part of that, if an individual homeowner wanted to have their own well, like for irrigation, or again, like a pool, would that be permitted? Are they restricted to using the community wells?
I will defer to the director.
In the instance of an individual property owner seeking to install an additional well, we'll do our best through the record plat and the indentures to prohibit such. We'll make sure that the plat contains script that only the potable water is served by multiple family wells as defined by the state of Missouri. In terms of this design, my understanding is that each of the pairs of lot will have a single potable well and an irrigation well. And the irrigation well will not draw, obviously, from the potable well, so to speak, so that It recharges the aquifer because it's just irrigating the ground. The other is a wastewater that goes through a treatment process and is discharged into the ground, but certainly both hopefully recharging the aquifer. The benefit also of these multiple family wells from the discussions that the department had with the state is that they're at a greater depth. And that was a concern of the residents around the areas that their wells, sometimes in instances 400 to 500 feet deep, are drawing from a portion of the aquifer, and they were concerned that these would do the same. These wells will be much deeper and access a different part of the aquifer. It's all the same water, but it'll come from a different location.
I don't know.
Just.
I don't know if we got an answer to so the questions are, as I understand it, two questions. Number one, can any well associated with this, either what we're requiring or if someone dug their own? Well, actually, we'll do that one first. Can someone, if they want to, dig their own well?
We'll do everything to stop that.
Okay, so probably not. And then second, can they use the well system that is in place as part of this development to fill their swimming pool?
Yes.
Thank you.
So kind of to piggyback, this is the first I've heard of community wells. Is there maintenance? Is this going to be like owned by the subdivision? Is there maintenance requirements for these?
Yeah, so there is maintenance requirements. There's a role of the homeowners association as well as the pair of property owners.
Okay. So the HOA will have some management of this.
There'll be an oversight, certainly. And this is the recommended approach for potable water from the Missouri Department of Natural Resources.
Okay.
It is new to us as well. Up to this point, we've generally allowed individual wells on each of the lots, which we're prohibiting here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Councilman Brost.
Yeah, I just, this probably minor, but reading the recommendation, it says, recommending approval, given it substantially complies. I mean, what doesn't comply?
Mr. Gross, those are the three items that are mentioned in the summary of the recommendation. There's some tweaks that need to be made to the natural resource protection standards based on the department's, review of it at the preliminary plat stage. And then those other notes and items that associated with the wastewater treatment and the potable water well that we're still kind of working through that need to be included on the record plat. Those aren't shown currently on the preliminary plat.
Thank you.
And if I may, Mr. Bros, as you know, when when the Planning and Zoning Commission granted the waiver to wastewater treatment, we had a long list of requirements, one of which was the developer setting aside X amount of dollars, I believe about $33,000 or $36,000 to capitalize the homeowners association in association with that. So we want to make sure that that's front and center on every document that comes out of this process, preliminary plat, record plat, indentures, et cetera.
All right. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, roll call vote.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohen,
Yes.
Chair Beatty,
Yes.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you. All right, Mr. Vunich, reoccupancy permit update.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and thank you. Again, here, I would like to thank Mr. Young for his assistance. The Planning and Zoning Commission months ago asked about the city possibly introducing a reoccupancy permit program for existing one-family and two-family dwellings. The Department of Planning had identified at that time that in our master plan, there is a policy recommending that that particular item be studied in the future. And so it kind of dovetailed together the request from Mr. Jackson, one of our commissioners, and the master plan. As part of that discussion, the mayor requested that two items be identified. First, legally, if such a program could be instituted by the city. And then secondly, the practicality of a program such as a reoccupancy. Mr. Young and I had a conversation last week, and we plan to have back to you as the commission answers to both of those questions no later than the April meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And, oh, Commissioner Khan?
Regarding the reoccupancy permit, how does that relate to commercial?
At this time, there is a commercial reoccupancy requirement. The city implements such, and we, through our contract with St. Louis County, they do the inspections, make recommendations relative to the inspections, and then provide the certificate, the final certificate of use and occupancy to the city, which releases it.
Along with the fire department.
Yes.
Thank you.
So yes, commercial buildings, because of their public nature, have two levels of review.
That looks like the end of the agenda, so motion to adjourn. Oh, motion by Commissioner Cohn, seconded by Councilman Brost. Just thinking you all wanted to stay here for a little bit longer. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?